Are you guys good? Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. All right, well, thank you very much for everybody coming out and spending your evening with us. I know it's a little chilly, but we appreciate you making the trek out here today. Just gonna go ahead and come in. Roll call, Sam Schoenberg, present. Benny Schaefer, present. Marilio Garcia, present. So now that we got roll call out the way, we are going to the agenda. Today, we're going to give a few updates as we normally do. We'll spend about 15-20 minutes giving any updates around the community meetings that we've had. But then the big topic today, as you may have seen from our email, is we're going to talk about a Chicago Police Department workforce allocation study. We're also going to be hearing from one of our commissioners, Commissioner Isaac Troncoso. He's going to be joining us in a little bit. He is from another meeting, but don't be surprised when he comes and joins us up here at the front. We're also going to do public comment a little bit differently today. We're going to be presenting a lot of information, so we want to do a little bit of a question and answer. We can do question and answer, and we can also do comments as normal. So if you do want to participate, Elise, if you want to wave your hand, she is collecting any slips if you want to make a public comment. If at any point you want to make a comment, you don't have a sheet, just flag her down, and then she'll bring it up to the front for us. And then finally, we're going to have you guys fill out a survey, not to spoil our thunder or anything, but we're gonna have you fill out a survey here and then also share that at the end of the meeting. Very quick, very easy, painless. So with that, we're just gonna go ahead and dive in.
Okay, so the first update that we always give you guys is on the migrant situation. Right now, the city is working to decompress all the police stations from individuals that are staying there. 18th district still has many people there. They have tried to decompress that several times. We keep getting a date of when it's going to happen. That date keeps getting pushed back. I don't have much faith that it will be cleared by the December 1st. But that is a goal that we are working to try and work towards. One thing that we're asking for advocacy around is we've had a single non-ever station for months. And we've been really working to get them beds because they see families come and then there's lots of shelters that house families. But the men are still kind of stuck there in Lake Michigan and really looking for a place for themselves. They've been a huge asset in our department. We had a whole entire tent city outside that I don't know if you've driven by it, but if you drove by today, the tent city is completely cleared because everyone now is inside the department. But they all help to remove those tents with some of our volunteers. So they are a huge asset, but they don't belong sleeping at the police station. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is I'm sure you've heard a little bit of talk about the new guidelines that migrants are allowed to stay in the new shelters for 60 days, and then they need to be on and housing with some stipulation around that. I just want to flag that we have an ASERAC program that was a rental assistance program that is now completely unavailable to migrants who are arriving. They also have no legal way to get expedited work permits. So expecting them to be out of shelter within 60 days with no way to pay for housing and no way to get assistance with that payment seems like an unsustainable solution. So something to flag for the city, and also just continuing to urge state and federal legislators that we need funding for this in our city.
And of course, QR code is there if you would like to scan it and support. Next, we're going to talk about incidents. I know we are literally at the location of many incidents recently here in the 47th Ward. As usual, we have conversations with command staff and CPD leadership at the 19th, specifically Commander Jasani. I spoke with Commander Jasani on Friday to talk about these incidents and ask what is being done. And what he has told me is that he is taking some squad cars that are at previous hotspots, if you would imagine Wilson and Broadway area, taking those units and applying them at bigger hotspots like the corner that we're at right now. So that is available and currently ongoing per Commander Jasani. I also wanted to reiterate that we have an email address. If you see or know of any further information of a robbery, carjacking, burglary, you can submit information, videos, witness testimony through this email address that is 019rbtinfo@chicagopolice.org. As I was told, you might not receive a response, but they are monitoring all of those emails. That is a direct email address that was created specifically for robberies, carjackings, and burglaries in the district. I did want to highlight in this orange box what we all are feeling and seeing, the increase in robberies and burglarizations. We see a lot of red at the bottom. That is what we're trying to address. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight specifically is this message that was given to me by Commander Gisani, that he is putting units that were at previous hotspots at new hotspots. And that is actually directly related to what the topic we're covering today of a workforce allocation study. We want to understand how those decisions are made and how we can help as citizens and as district council members to make sure that he has the resources and the data to support what we feel on an everyday basis. Additionally, we wanted to highlight the 6-month check-in that we had with Commander Gisani. We had it with Captain Forbes and Sergeant Slater. That was the 3 of us meeting all together. So we did make it a public meeting and we had a good conversation. It was mainly around our vision for the next coming 6 months. One of the great things that came out of it is that we've heard that Commander Gisani has a great relationship with new Superintendent Larry Snelling. And we have ourselves signed up for ride-alongs and roll calls. The roll calls so that we can let patrolling officers know who we are, what our mission is, and what you are telling us. Ride-alongs so we can know exactly what happens as CPD officers go about their daily lives on the job. We also reaffirmed our commitments to our goals. One of the biggest things that you guys have heard us talk about over and over again is this idea of expanding mental health services and resources to offload the CPD burden. So Commander Gisani is a big fan of the CARE program and is advocating for the expansion, just like we are, of the CARE program, when it operates and what kinds of calls it can attend to. We also talked about alternative solutions to address homelessness and alleviate that burden on CPD as well. Bring Chicago Home Initiative is another big thing that we've talked about that will help with that. We also talked about the reimagination of what the role and responsibility list for CPD officers is. As you may imagine, when us talking about mental health and homelessness response, that's on the jobs of CPD right now. Has their job description grown unfairly? Maybe we should have alternative people addressing those issues versus CPD, so our CPD officers can attend to serious and violent crimes. So we were talking about those things with Commander Gisani. Again, he agrees that we need to redefine and hone in on what police officers should focus on. And then we also talked about the benefits of a workforce allocation study, as this is the topic of our conversation today. Lastly, we did talk about new initiatives that are happening in the district and around the city. One of the things is neighborhood walking program for patrol officers. So maybe at the end of each duty, officers can spend 2 hours walking in the neighborhoods. Because I think a lot of us have expressed the need to get to know our officers and see them out in the streets on foot. That's one of the things that they are piloting and thinking about for here in the 19th district, as well as consistency in casework for detectives. We'll touch on this a little bit in the meeting, but having consistent ownership of cases and investigations by detectives themselves, changing the way that that is operated today so that we can have more consistency and continuity of those managing those cases. So these are all things that we've talked about and we'll continue to talk about with Commander Gisani.
Ron, I doesn't mind be calling out, but we're joined by a couple of members of CPD here, particularly Captain Terry Forbes, who's recently joined us in the 19th Police District. So thank you very much for being here, and we appreciate your feedback along with everyone else here. I wanted to highlight that we had a meeting between Mayor of Chicago, Mayor Johnson, Deputy Mayor for Community Safety, Gary and Gatewood. This was organized with members of district and Chicago City of Chicago. It was the first official meeting that the mayor held with this new branch of government. I attended on behalf of the 19th district. The main takeaway is that the mayor recognizes that this is a new form of government that it needs support. There's still We need to figure out what resources the district councils need and make sure that they can do their jobs effectively. And the message that we as district councils really deliver to the administration is that we want to be brought in on public safety conversations that are taking place in our district. If the deputy mayor for community safety has a meeting in the 19th Police District or with organizations here, we want to know about it and be invited. And they committed to making sure that we were able to play the role that we were elected to play. It was a very positive meeting. I think it will continue to bear fruit going forward. I just wanted to let you know that that first official meeting had happened. We also went out in the first quarterly meeting of district councils from throughout the city. That creates this position. The main piece of it is where you all are right now in our monthly public meetings within our police districts. But the ordinance also offers an opportunity for district councils from throughout the city to share knowledge about what they're seeing in their areas, about what other issues they're having, what common things we have going on. And the first one of those meetings took place a few weeks ago, earlier this month. Jenny and I were able to attend. It was a 5-hour meeting. We covered a lot of public safety incidents in our districts. What's the same, different across Chicago, police response and accountability issues, and also district council resources and how we're running meetings. We're each on the job for 6 months in this new institution. We're all figuring out as we go, and it was a wonderful first opportunity to share what we've learned so far and figure out ways that we can continue working. And coming up, we're going to have an annual meeting of district council members to set goals and priorities for the statewide community commission for public safety and accountability. That's going to be our workshop this year to send a message in a formal way to the community commission about what we want them to prioritize going forward. And of course, that communication continues in less formal ways at other times, but I'm looking forward to that in the meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. Lots of meetings going on. That community commission that I just mentioned is in place right now on an interim basis. We are joined by one of our commissioners tonight. Isaac Francoso will be joining us to speak later this evening about the workforce allocation issues. But Commissioner Francoso and his colleagues were appointed by the last mayor to fill their positions while the district councils are on the ground. Now that the district councils are elected, we have the responsibility of nominating the full commission to the mayor, and the mayor will then appoint from district council nominees. I serve on the nominating committee from the 19th Police District. We met earlier this month as a nominating committee to set schedules for interviewing candidates, for reviewing applications. We discussed the rubric that we're going to be using to evaluate applicants for the next commission. And we made sure that the entire month of February and part of March was blocked out because it take that long to interview at least 28 to 35 people and then submit names for nomination to the mayor. The big takeaway for the community is that the applications for the next commission opens on January 8th and will be open for 30 days. It'll end February 7th, 2024. During that time, any resident in the city of Chicago that fits the criteria in the ordinance can apply to serve on this commission. The commission plays a very important role in setting priorities for the police superintendent and nominating the police superintendent to the mayor, as we saw with now Superintendent Snelling, setting police policy and setting goals for the accountability agencies in Chicago. So it's a very important role, and we're really engaged in making sure that the community's voice is reflected in the makeup of the next commission.
The next thing we want to report on is the consent decree. As I'm sure you guys all know, the city of Chicago and the police department are under a consent decree. Every 6 months, there's an independent monitoring team that releases a report about how we are doing towards compliance on the goals that are set. There's between 500 and 600 different paragraphs, all listing goals that the city needs to complete. One of the reasons why we are really committed to making sure that the consent decree gets implemented in a more expeditious manner than it has been is because of this quote from Deborah Whisper. And she says this is not about choosing between police reform and keeping people safe. It is only by reforming the way we police that we can keep people safe. So I think we really need to remember that I think sometimes the conversation becomes a dichotomy, like either we're keeping people safe or we're reforming the police, but we really believe that these things have to happen simultaneously and together, and we can't create safe communities until we are actually completing all these different paragraphs on the consent decree. So the monitoring team goes through each paragraph and says how are we not compliance. There are 3 levels. There's preliminary, secondary, and full compliance. Preliminary means we are starting to think about what this could look like. Secondary means that these things we're starting to implement them. And then full compliance means we are actually doing them to completion. So as you can see, we have 6% full compliance after this is the 8th report to the 4 years, which ended. And I just want to also just acknowledge that this ended in July 30th. So we are a couple months past this, but obviously it takes a little bit of time to release the report. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about the independent monitoring report, but we just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of where we are now. One of the things that they really hit on in the report was that there is a disconnect between the Office of Constitutional Policing and Reform, which is the office that's kind of charged with taking on these responsibilities, and then the rest of the CPD operations, which includes the first deputy superintendent and the Bureau of Control and the Bureau of Counterterrorism. So we hope to continue making progress on that, and we'll keep pushing for that. And in the new budget, there are a lot of things that I believe will help us make further progress. And then the last update that we always like to give is just a reminder that we are always available and interested in wanting to sit down and have conversations with people in the community. We have had many of those meetings throughout this last month, and we encourage you to reach out to us at this email address or your personal email addresses to arrange a meeting. Just want to highlight that the Ravenswood Neighbors Association invited us out to a meeting of theirs, that we guys begin and talk about what district council is doing and how we can hear their concerns and how we can work together. So we would love to be invited to more of those.
So now let's dig into Chicago Police Department Workforce Allocation Study. And just as a reminder, these slides are going to be available online on our CCPSA website. There's links in here, there's information and sources. So please, if you find something that you have questions about, always look online. If not, as Jenny mentioned, email us. So what is a CPD workforce allocation study? So this is the way that we, Sam, Jenny, and I, as 19 police district council members, define a workforce allocation study. I say that because there is no current official definition. So we believe it to be an in-depth data-driven analysis of the Chicago Police Department's complete workforce, including sworn officers and non-sworn positions. This analysis could examine an array of factors, including but not limited to where and when sworn officers are deployed. For example, what area, what district, what parts of mission teams are they, what beat do they control? What types of calls for service officers are adjusting, how much time officers spend answering calls for service, and the extent of responsibilities and tasks currently expected of them. We'd also like to do this for the non-sworn officers as well. A little bit of history. So CPD actually commissioned 2 partially completed workforce allocation studies back in 2016 and 2019, one by an independent consultant and the other one by University of Chicago's Crime Lab. However, neither results were released. Also in 2019, as Jenny was just mentioning, we had a federal consent decree implemented, and the CPD was ordered to develop a staffing model that, quote, considers data-driven resource allocation methods incorporating district-specific factors, including but not limited to calls for service, public violence, and property crime. A little bit of reference in terms of other major U.S. cities and workforce allocation studies. So studies are actually standard for police departments and have been completed by other major cities such as San Francisco and Houston. Staffing models are also used to adjust personnel at various intervals throughout the year in cities including Los Angeles and New York City. Really important note is that Los Angeles is actually a pretty good comparison to Chicago. It's similar in size, was also forced to abide by a consent decree and actually fulfilled the consent decree. So they are a pretty good model for us to take a look at and try to mirror. And finally, we just want to hit home on the fact that because we're asking for a CPD workforce allocation study, it doesn't mean we are against normal operations of police. What we want is more effective policing. We believe this is going to be helping our community in ways that I mentioned earlier. You know, we have a new hotspot that has unfortunately arisen here at Sunnyside and Lincoln. We need to be able to have police address these issues very quickly. It shouldn't require us as residents to be enraged, send email after email to our elected officials to demand more police. It should be something that is data-driven and easily implementable. And we believe a workforce allocation study is going to allow for that. Specifically, this is something that we can accomplish in the near term. We also hear a lot about, okay, we are talking about long-term strategies. This is something that we feel like can be implemented in the next 2 years. I know that's not immediate enough for some folks, but this is, at least I personally believe, one of the most important things that we can do to truly change the way policing is for our neighborhoods. One thing that I was just touching on is that should be ongoing and dynamic. Okay, a new hotspot arises in one area, we need to be able to move to those areas immediately. And then the last thing is that we need to have a workforce allocation study with results released to the public in accordance to our goals and values and being and holding the police department more accountable. We believe transparency is number one.
So now I want to discuss a little bit why a workforce allocation study might be needed, and really touched on some of those factors just now. We're going to go through what some others have said about this in a moment, because we are not the only ones suggesting this as a potential solution. Before I get there, just one more reason why I think a workforce allocation study could be really useful is to make the job of policing easier for officers. So often officers from command staff that officers are overworked. There is a big wellness issue in the Chicago Police Department that was identified in the police consent decree. And I want policing to be a job that people want to do, that is fulfilling, that feels effective, that is having a good impact. And this study can maybe help show where that impact can be better felt and officers' time can be better spent. So a little bit of comparative numbers. And this is based on numbers, I believe, in 2022. Is that right? You know, if we compare Chicago to comparable cities, the 5 most populous cities in the United States, Chicago has the highest number, even as of 2022, the highest number of sworn officers per capita compared to any of these other cities. So we know that at least on a per capita basis, there is the staffing there that's comparable to any of our sister cities and even exceeds it by a great deal. And to put some absolute numbers on this is a chart that was published in a workforce study blog that was done by the City of Federation that just shows the number of sworn officers that Chicago has had in recent years, from August of 2017 through June of 2022. And we looked this up today. It's the current number of sworn officers is 11,722, according to this dashboard from the Inspector General's office. We also do hear that the police workforce is down, and it is down, but I think it's also important that we recognize that the workforce was as high as it had ever been in history just a few years ago. It peaked at 13,300 and so. If you look just a few years earlier, it was down to about 12,150. Today, we are still down compared to that number, but by a few hundred and not by a few thousand. So that might just help with a little bit of context where we've been and where we are now. Even looking just at the numbers of sworn officers in the Chicago Police Department, police departments have a mix of sworn officers and non-sworn positions. And Chicago, again, compared to the 5 largest, or the other 4 largest, most populous cities in the United States, as a very small proportion of its department are civilians. And these are jobs that, you know, the point of having civilian positions in a police department is to allow sworn officers to do the work that they're trained to do, that they're best equipped to do, which is to address crime, address serious crime issues, and make sure that they're out patrolling beats, not stuck doing paperwork, not doing public relations, and making sure that there's a good allocation between sworn and non-sworn officers. And right now, Chicago's workforce is pretty out of whack. As I mentioned, we did not just come up with this idea of a workforce allocation study on our own. There are several prominent groups in Chicago that have been calling for one as recently as this month. Here, we put out a quote from the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, which I talked about earlier. By city ordinance, the CCPSA is required to apply on the proposed budget for the Chicago Police Department. And one of the things that the CCPSA pointed out this year, as it did last year, is that the city really lacks a data-driven workforce allocation study. And as they wrote in the report, having this kind of study is particularly important for the Bureau of Patrol, which is the largest portion of the police department, about 10,000, or 9 or 10,000 of the officers members of the line. And current data community that we have suggests that patrol officers aren't allocated equally or effectively across districts. And that in some districts, there's really high response times to both emergencies and non-emergency calls, and in other districts, even the most serious emergency calls can have a very slow response time. This is set out for its number one recommendation in this report that CPD should include in its 2024 goals of completing and implementing a high-quality, comprehensive workforce allocation study and developing a data-driven strategy for workforce allocation. So this is something that is being called for by that commission for those reasons. Likewise, Jenny mentioned earlier the independent monitor for the police consent decree. Chicago's under a federal consent decree to reform the police department. And in the report that was most recently produced, the executive summary, that CPD continues to allocate personnel and prioritize resources without a transparent and data-driven staffing study. And just one piece of this report that highlights why such a study might be necessary is in the community policing section of the report. Chicago actually lost ground in compliance in community policing and the consent decree over the last reporting period. As you can see with this graphic here, 4 of the measurable paragraphs that have goals for the department to meet were reduced a level of compliance from the last reporting period to this one. And as the independent monitor wrote, the Office of Community Policing has experienced significant reductions in its staff over the last several years, and those who remain are often pulled away to other assignments. This results in missed deadlines with the consent decree, inadequate outreach efforts, failures to identify, develop, and expand partnerships with community groups and stakeholders, and delays in developing and implementing youth programs. That's just one more place where we at least see hints of misallocation of resources within the department. Organization, the University of Chicago Crime Lab, also called for and was asked to do a workforce application study a couple of years ago. Now, this study, as Aurelio mentioned a minute ago, was not fully released to the public, even after a number of FOIA requests to the Chicago Police Department. But one public document that UChicago did put out indicated that too often officers just aren't available when and where they're most urgently needed. As I mentioned, as the CCPSA mentioned earlier, UChicago points out as well that in some areas there's very fast response times to both emergency and non-emergency calls. In others, there's very slow response times even to serious emergency calls. And on the officer wellness standpoint, these discrepancies can undermine officer morale, as some officers are consistently overworked while others are underutilized. The report from UChicago was not fully released to the public. Reporting from the Chicago Tribune that got access to at least some redacted information from the UChicago study indicated that throughout the city of Chicago, officers may not be stationed at the times when crime is most likely to happen. And the quote that I pulled out here is that at least based on the preliminary analysis done by UChicago, 14% of shootings happen between midnight and 5 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays in the city's least safest areas. But only 3.8% of the work hours Chicago police tactical teams were logged happened during that same 10-hour period. And what that indicates is a misallocation of putting officers in the places that crime is most effective. I also mentioned this meeting that we had with the mayor's office. And one of the questions that I had for the deputy mayor for community safety, Marion Gatewood, is whether the city would commit to the workforce allocation study, and in fact thought that this was important to do and release publicly. And I did secure a commitment from the deputy mayor that the city would complete a workforce allocation study and release the results publicly. I do want to share out. We're trying to get results for the community here, and we did get that commitment from the administration on this issue, and it's something that's top of mind for them as well. Finally, 47th Ward Alderman Matt Martin, who is the alderman for the ward covering the library in which he's in today, has introduced an order into City Council that would call for a workforce allocation study to be done. And he's hoping that it will be done, I spoke to him earlier today, within the next year before budgeting begins for the next budget season. Because that will allow for the city to have the most up-to-date information in order to base budgeting decisions. So this order, if it was passed, would require the city to conduct a workforce allocation study and develop a data-driven allocation methodology that includes requirements outlined in the police consent decree that would help to align what the department does with what the consent decree requires.
There it is.
So a quick takeaway slide. I'm giving really the player for this one because it put it all together. I won't read through all this because it's just it's mostly a summary of everything I just discussed. But these are all the reasons why a workforce allocation study is needed. It's called for by a number of city governmental and private institutions based on the information that we have. Going backwards in compliance with the consent decree, this may be inequitably distributed across our city. This does hurt officer wellness and morale, and there's very little public transparency into where CPD is working and when. And so that's why we think a workforce allocation study is something that's necessary for us to move forward and just improve the public safety in our city.
Okay, so what kind of questions do we want to see this workforce allocation study answer? So we're going to start with the first question is figuring out what the right number of officers is. When the University of Chicago did their report, the department gave them the 60-40 ratio, meaning 60% of their time they should be responding to calls, 40% of their time they should be engaged in other policing work like community engagement, like paperwork, trainings, things like that. The department needs to determine if this is still the ratio that they want to use, but whatever the ratio is, they need to determine that and collect data on that, as well as calls for service, make a formula so that we can clearly understand how many officers are needed in each week. Sorry. So some of the questions that would go to answer the right number of officers is, do we have enough officers patrolling beats? How much time do officers spend responding to calls for service? Officers placed when and where crime happens? And how does CPD make assignments now? And how can CPD use available data to deploy officers more efficiently in the future? The second topic that we wanted to have explored through the workforce allocation study is the consistency of officers. One of the things that the federal consent decree requires us to do is to achieve this unity of command and a span of control, which means that we should have one sergeant assigned to no more than 10 officers, and that sergeant will be assigned to them continuously, and they should be working in the same district and during the same watch. And that's a really important part of the consent decree that they are right now trialing in one district, but what needs to be expanded to all districts. And one of the reasons that it's important to us is because we hear from community members that who want to know who is patrolling their beats. They want to see consistency of those people, and they want to be able to talk to someone who is on consistent patrol during their beat. So maintaining this unity of, or not maintaining, but achieving this unity of command and span of control would really help work towards those goals. And we know that when officers are in the same neighborhood, seeing the same people, that helps to build relationships and increase communication, which just fosters trust between CPD and community, which really is right now one of the things that is most broken in the city and would really help to create more effective public safety. So questions around those topics would be, how can we achieve that unity of command and span of control? How can we achieve consistency of patrol within a beat? So with the same officers patrolling the same beats consistently? And then what are the breakdowns in the system that are preventing us from achieving this goal? How come we can't do that right now? There's a different strategy that the police department uses for deploying officers. And how can we move from the current strategy to one that maintains this unity of control and span, this unity of command and span of control? Topic 3, something that we have spoken about a lot. Are the officers fulfilling the right responsibilities? This is something that we've spoken even with the commander of the 19th district about, and everyone is in agreement that they're being asked to do too many things right now. And one of the things that we are really looking at the data, Chicago, as we have shown, has the highest number of sworn officers per resident of any major city in America. And at the same time, we also have a high proportion of sworn officers to non-sworn officers within the department. And we have worse crime outcomes in other cities in Chicago and other cities in America. Our hypothesis is that we have enough officers in the department, but they're engaged in the wrong tasks. And the only way we can know if this hypothesis is true or not true is through a workforce allocation study. So we have some questions that we want to have answered. Do we have jobs within the department that could be better filled by non-sworn officers rather than sworn officers? With that low, we have like a 5% rate of non-sworn civilians within our department. If other departments are able to have a greater percentage of civilians doing those jobs, where in our department do we have those officers who could be on patrolling beats, but instead are behind a desk? Maybe they are working on data, doing things that we could have civilians fulfill. The second question, do we have jobs within the department that could be better filled by other Chicago departments? For example, the mobile health crisis response, homelessness, that we talked about, jobs like police is something we hear often. What other departments should be in that expanded public safety vision that we have to speak about often? And then how can CPD allocate its workforce to better contribute to officer wellness too? Because we know that this affects officer wellness as well. And it is vital that the officers are feeling supported and feeling well in their job so that they can do the best jobs possible. And then the last topic is more effective policing that we want to explore. Chicago lags behind other major U.S. cities in solving murders. Chicago's clearance rate is below 50%. And so what can we do to make sure that our police are able to effectively solve murders, effectively make arrests, so that we can be more aligned with other major cities in America? Some questions that go along with that is, how can the CPD's workforce be allocated to improve clearance rates, both for the most serious crimes and across the board? How can CPD improve response times to 911 calls? And also, where are the inefficiencies that we have within our department that are making it difficult for officers to complete their assignments on time? One of the things that we spoke about with Commander Sani was this, and that he was excited about, and that sounded exciting to the three of us as well, was a reallocation of detective shifts. So that the department was able to shift around how the detectives will be able to investigate homicides, where they run 5-week shifts, and they'll be able to keep their same cases with them all 5 for the entirety of the case. To me, that was shocking that didn't already happen. Like they just pass off these cases to one another, and so where are these inefficiencies happening, and how can we eliminate them in more areas? Here's a fancy tech moment. We're going to end this with a quote from Deborah Woodsbury, who is the Inspector General in Chicago.
Oops. One second.
Our control over something is not a substitute for a second strategy. What we need to be doing, we need to start with a thoughtful conversation about right sizing the footprint of the police department. This is not a problem we hire our way out. We need to make decisions about what functions should live within the police department and which functions should live somewhere else. Once we have identified those things that we want members of the police department to be doing, we need a thoughtful and process of how many people it takes to do those things. We need a proactive, nimble, data-driven staffing strategy, which is built on strategic priorities for the police department. Chicago has more cops per capita than other major cities. Hiring more officers is not the answer. We need to be more thoughtful about what we want police officers to do and how many of them we need doing it. The city has historically been constantly opaque about the police department's strategy and what model the department is using to make resource allocation decisions. There are constrained resources here. There's not an infinite hiring pool. The pool of applicants to law enforcement jobs across the country is shrinking. Cannot assume that this is simply a question of hiring more officers. We're not going to get an infinite number of officers, and we already have more cops per capita than our peer cities. We have to be making more thoughtful decisions about allocating resources.
Yeah, isn't there more of a need than ever for a police reallocation study, the kind that activists have been clamoring for years?
Yes.
Okay, she put it more eloquently than for sure I could, so we wanted you to be able to hear that. And now we are going to invite the CCPSA Commissioner, Isaac Troncoso. Thank you very much for joining us. He's going to add a little bit about what the CCPSA is thinking about as far as that workforce allocation study. And then I think we're going to move to a hybrid public comment section where people can ask questions and give general public comment as well. But first.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to take a moment if there were some notes, but I just wanted to introduce myself a bit. So I'm one of the 7 commissioners on the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability. And I actually have the pleasure of being a resident of the 19th district as well, over in East Lakeview. So I'm local, 22 police districts, but I guess one of the 7 commissioners happens to be from here. And so the way it's broken down is that by law, there have to be 2 commissioners from each side of the city, north, south, and west. That brings us to 6. 1 can be from wherever, so we have to have 2 north, which I'm 1, 2 south, and 3 west. And I actually believe the other north side commissioner is also a resident of 19. So I'll just talk a bit about workforce allocation in general. The district council covered much of background info, but I'll give some more detail on that and a bit of the commission's perspective as well. So I would say from my personal experience, it is my impression that there is really little transparent, publicly available, data-driven strategy for how CPD allocates its officers. I would say that this is due to many things, everything from individual aldermen advocating for officers going to their wards with political clout, doing it with intuition and guesswork, the 60-40 ratio being case in point of that. Allocating, you know, something I anecdotally heard in one of my ride-alongs with officers was that often rookies or young officers will be allocated to districts with more violence. And so, you know, that's another just that illustrate how this is driven by norms, customs, individual people's opinions, rather than really a data-driven strategy. So there are vastly unequal and poor response times in some areas of the city, which is, you know, shocking to hear for people that have maybe never called 911 or never needed officers. But in some areas, you can have up to 2 hours of response time, not a response time. Anecdotally, you know, I myself in 19 on Clark and Deming in Lincoln Park experienced a 25-minute response time to a shooting that occurred just outside of my window about a year ago. And, you know, CPD leadership requested a few years ago that UChicago, as mentioned, develop this data-driven approach. So that began in 2019. And there was a really little systematic oversight over how much time officers spend responding to 911 calls versus accomplishing the other parts of their demanding job, like filing reports, et cetera, the administrative tasks. And so we kind of come up with this 60-40 arbitrary ratio. And that was really not a number that UChicago found. That was not a number that was arrived at via research and data. What UChicago's study did was they used shooting data and placed GPSs on police cars over a 6-month period that covered summer and winter. So I believe it was June of 21 to February of 22. And they did not find that deployments lined up to where there were shootings. For example, as they said, you know, 14% of shootings happened in the most violent districts between midnight to 5 a.m., but only 4% of officers was allocated there. So almost 3x what you'd expect that to be. To back that up, and just to back up a little bit, the timeline again is that UChicago began in 2019. They observed deployments from 20 to 21. CPD received the analysis in March of 21. And from what I have heard from the team, much with it, as they mentioned, the redacted version was released publicly, which is where we get some of these numbers. And the commission, so the commission was put into place via the same law that created the district councils in 2021, but we arrived on the scene a lot faster than the district councils because they needed to be elected. So we arrived in August of 22. So we've been in office for just over a year. About a year and 3 months or so. And the district council, of course, are from April of this year. So we were in office over a year ago, and we set annual goals for CPD. So in our first round of setting annual goals, we invited Superintendent Brown to speak in October of 22. And this was our second or third meeting as a commission. And then Superintendent Brown basically said that he wanted a new study conducted. And that the first one was missing some elements, you know, not accounting for vast amounts of officers, et cetera, was his response to the study. I was skeptical about this because, you know, UChicago directly partnered with CPD on this. And so, you know, if you wanted to study certain elements, you should have included that if you wanted that to be part of the study. And should not then at the end of the study be saying those elements were not part of it. So that's kind of some background, and obviously Superintendent Brown is no longer the superintendent. We've actually had run our third since him. So we've had 2 interims and now we have a permanent. So we're very likely, we actually have placed the workforce allocation study in our CPD annual goals this year, as we did last year. And we're optimistic, more optimistic than last year, that that goal will be acted upon, as we have a new superintendent that has thus far been cooperative with us and is the first one that was ever put into place by us. So if anyone doesn't have any background, the commission, what we do is we oversee the process for nominating a new superintendent. You might have seen that in the news, but we nominate 3 candidates to the mayor whenever superintendent resigns or whenever there's a vacancy. So this new superintendent, Snelling, which was put into place a couple months ago, was the first one that we underwent that process this past summer. So I'll just stop there. Or I guess one more thing I'd like to add is really what we can get from a workforce allocation study. You know, in my personal opinion, there's a lot of value to be gained from this. You know, I think in 2 areas. number one, oversight of officer interactions, and number two, I would say also in response times and therefore solving crime. So I'll just speak again anecdotally, zoom this a bit into 19. In the shooting that occurred right outside my window, I actually remember what happened was it was a motorcyclist that was hit by a car, and the motorcyclist took out a gun and then fired at the car. And he actually stayed on the scene for 20 minutes because he thought he was the victim because he had been hit by a car. And because of the long response time, this suspect was hanging out at the scene and witnesses were hanging out at the scene. And he and witnesses slowly started to disperse over 25 minutes because nobody came, not a single car until then. And out of curiosity as a commissioner, I actually I called 911 and I was really, disappointed about that. But I would say that I think by arriving on the scene faster, where shootings happen, we can stop crime by getting more witness statements, by being more likely to actually catch a suspect, and therefore stopping repeat crime from occurring. And I would say another thing is that, anecdotally, again, during my ride along that I went on, I was with a sergeant, and part of his job was going around to in progress 911 calls and overseeing how things were going with his beat officers, basically managing them and saying, how are things going when they're responding to the call as an experienced veteran that he was. And he had far more than the 10 goal under him. And so he was stretched extremely thin, trying to bounce around between, 20-ish beat officers and see how they're all going as they're in progress responding to 911 calls. Which allows for him to have, less oversight of new officers, less coaching, less coming on the scene and providing his expert advice. So I think those are two areas of positive value that we can get from the study. And I'll stop there.
Any final thoughts before we go into? Okay, so we're gonna go to public comment now. And as I mentioned, it's gonna be a little bit different. We're gonna request questions, and one of the four of us will try to answer it. And if we can't, we'll find you the resource, that can. Just as a reminder, public comment, 2 minutes per speaker. I'll put up a really fancy timer here in a second. Please, no harassment of any kind. There's not a zero tolerance policy with us, but please try to stay on topic. And as you start your public comment, state and spell your name for the record. And again, if anybody wants to make a public comment, please fill out one of these sheets, and we will go from there. So when I call your name, please come up to the front. You can take the podium. I'll hand you my microphone, and then you can ask a question or you can make a comment.
Just a reminder, it doesn't need to be, you can ask a question, we'd love to answer a question, but it doesn't need to be about this either.
Okay, Sandy Gordon, please come to the top. Random order.
Thank you. Sandy Gordon, G-O-R-D-O-N. I have a few questions, but the main one is, I'm wondering if the study is planning to include efficiencies related to how the officers take in information and how the reports are filed. I'm the one who at your first meeting brought up that they're using Windows Vista, and I'm hoping that the efficiencies that the officers can use in their tools will help them to have more efficiency on the job.
That's a totally fair question for this study to ask. So I've taken this down. We're also not going to get ahead of ourselves, but we're going to kind of survey here in a bit. And what we really want is questions from the community that a workforce allocation study would answer. Jenny presented a number of questions that we would like to see a workforce allocation study answer, but the study is only as good as the questions it asks. And what we would try to do with the answers once we got them, so that's a very good one.
Would just add to that, that when I spoke with officers in surrounding states for some of my cybercrime stuff, that other officers are using some high technology where they can take in the information into like a computer in their car on the site. And also it helps them to share the information with other departments. And also, I would love to know, so the questions to ask are, how are they filing it? I would imagine it's not their favorite part of the job to do the paperwork. Could we see if there are other people better fit for paperwork jobs that could come into those roles? And then lastly, even using AI and some of the newer technology, like it could be dictation that goes straight to a form, that goes straight to the website. There are ways to connect all of these dots. And I wonder how long also that this survey is going to take. Like how long will it take to grab all this information that you're collecting? When do you think you'll see results?
That's on me. I'm the data guy up here. Yeah, we want to allow the survey to be up for a good amount of time. Last time we did 2 months, just 2 months, just because we were lacking in responses. But I'm hopeful that we can release results in January. Give a month to collect data and a month to analyze, and then we can release those results. And like the last results, we always release those publicly and even provide the data source.
That's amazing. Thank you.
You can just leave it there. We'll show this. Thank you, Zane. I was very proud of this turkey timer. So next we have Carson Wayne, please. And this is where say your name and then spell it for the record, please.
Hi, Carson Wong, CARSONWAND. So you mentioned that there's about a 2-year, you expect the report to be done in about 2 years. Do you have in mind a roadmap of how we would get there? And also what milestones in that roadmap we would get to, maybe at like a 3-month point or quarterly points? And also whether or not, could there be a way to ensure not only transparency for the full report, to make sure every one of those steps and every one of those milestones, a portion or something is seen publicly as well, so people can be aware of the progress. And additionally, I'm wondering if, because you mentioned that Alderman Martin also has the order, I'm wondering if there are other alders who are elected officials as well in our own district who have signed on to that order. And also if that order includes a deadline or a similar kind of roadmap in that order. You mentioned that Alderman Martin puts in about a year. If that deadline isn't met, or if the transparency isn't what we hope it to be, is there an accountability measure for that, and how will you be part of that?
I can try and answer some of those questions. My memory is terrible, so I will try. I will look at it a little bit. Right now, Alderman has this order, and it's in a committee, which is the next step it needs to go. It is in the Fire and Police Committee. It needs to get passed out of committee to become an order. So one of the things that we have talked about doing is writing a letter to that committee, encouraging them to pass it to the city council so that it can become an order. And like we mentioned, that you said, Alderman Martin's goal is that it will be passed through in a year so that we can get started on that work. What else was I going to say? One of the things they're also looking towards is for a funding source for this, and the options would be to have a foundation funded or to have it funded from within the city. One of the really great things about having a foundation funded is that we can ensure that transparency, other than with the U of Chicago study that's funded by the city, and then that was not released by them. So if we can keep it private, we'd be able to meet all of those different standards. And I agree that having, to whatever extent possible, releasing what they're finding as they are at different intervals would be a really good step if possible.
Let's just say a couple things there. I think some additional things that I personally would be in favor of, as we do now, is also a release of the University of Chicago redacted study, in addition to conducting this on a regular basis. We don't want a scenario where we conduct one workforce allocation study and then we get around to it again in 20 years, as we do with updating some other policies. So I don't want that to be a situation. And I would say some tools that the commission has of accountability, which are fairly blunt instruments, but what we do have is we do issue goals on the superintendent, on CPD in general. And then we also issue evaluations of how we performed against those goals. And then lastly, hypothetically, if a superintendent is extremely unsatisfactory, we do have the power to, by majority vote, call for a vote of no confidence in the superintendent, which forces a vote on city council on whether to remove the superintendent. So that's the point to go about into that.
Good, thank you, Carson. Nick Cove, please. The front. I feel like I'm a principal calling students down to the box.
Nick N-I-K Hovey Show. Great news to hear that you guys are planning to kind of send a recommendation around what answers or what questions can be answered by the study. I did have a question around how much you guys will have sway over what vendor they choose, because that could be, what if they're really obstinate and that's just not what they do? Do you guys have to say in that? The other thing that I wanted to just throw in is my 2 cents around some things that maybe you could plug for questions to answer. I think the geography part is really important to know that you guys touched on how we're allocating people across geography, but New York is extremely dense, so the per capita number sometimes maybe can be a little misleading. We're a lot more spread out in the city. In general, I talk about high crime areas like our cops going there, but just I think that some kind of geography-based questions would really help understand how effective these are. But yeah, my question around whether or not you guys can influence.
I will, remind folks that our position, we're mainly ambassadors and advocacy based, right? But that is one of the reasons that we want to form this letter that Jenny has mentioned, because that is going to show how many people are actually in favor of this idea, and we can start to hold our elected officials, including ourselves, accountable. In terms of the vendor chosen, I don't know if Isaac or anybody else has any process.
It'll be Chicago.
Unfortunately. I would say that a couple things there. So the commission comments on the budget every year. So we basically issue a report. We issued one this past month. So theoretically, if they were saying we want to use this vendor, it would be in the budget, we can comment on, recommend or advance certain vendor. What depending on whether there's announced publicly during budget season. I would say as well, we do not have the power to approve or disapprove of line items in the budget. That's city council and the mayor. But honestly, typically, when we have hearings and generate headlines, I find it for the most part we understand. So that's all.
And just to piggyback on that, you could, if the commission is making that recommendation that this is not the right vendor for, we can also bring that doubt back to the community, and that's kind of the beauty of these two bodies working together. Thank you.
Ivan Handler, please.
Handler, IVANHANDLER. I guess I'm going to follow up with Sandy. So I've been in IT for a very long time, and one of the things I'm really concerned about is when you've had a deficit of data, you want to correct it, there's a tendency to want to get all the data you've been missing. And I believe that will actually give you less data effectively. It's really important to understand that people don't like to fill out data, and to get it efficiently, we need to think about automated ways. I think Sandy said some of them, but we need to think about what the change is, how difficult it's going to be, because Otherwise, the data-driven strategies are going to be with less data than we think, even though we may have more. So I just want to be cautious about this because data gathering is something I know a lot about, and it's not an easy, might sound easy, but it's not easy. There's people we have to deal with, not just computers. Thanks.
I will say that the consent decree also has a paragraph in there about a full audit of data collection and how the data is used, processed, and shared. So I think that is another big point of the consent decree that we need to lean on.
And just on that point, if you read the independent monitor's report from the consent decree, it is replete with calls for more data from the police department and discussions of how inadequate the current data systems are. And actually, the problem that we tend to have in not just the Chicago Police Department, but police departments in general, they generate a lot of data already, terabytes of data. It's figuring out how to log it in a consistent way and make any sense of it in a way that gives you actionable takeaways. That is a challenge, and it's something that's a very big challenge that is going through right now. And I'm sure it will be something that is also in the midst of concerns for conducting this kind of study and trying to figure out ways to make sure that there are already good data sources in place using those and building data sources for this study that they're not necessarily just used for this study, but can also be used to help the department maintain itself and improve going forward. So you're not the only one to mention this issue, but we agree. I agree it's a good one.
I would just add that, definitely point well taken. I think right now, in many ways, we're trying to get something where there was close to nothing. So, we are searching for ways to do that. One thing that anecdotally I've seen other police departments take advantage of is when you file a police report, you're doing it, that asks things such as, what was the response? Obviously, that's just one part of it. That's self-reported. That's one person's memory, whatever it may be. But considering that we have over I think 200,000 victims per year, and we're not getting any kind of data from that, I think that's a missed opportunity. So I think there's many ways to do it, and we're searching around right now.
Just a quick time check. We are going to run through the rest of these comments, but we were informed by the library that it's a library and closes at 8 p.m. So once this meeting is over, we would kindly ask that everybody, vacate the premise and just allow folks to close up. So just didn't want to forget about that point. James Klosowski, if you would like to go. You can make a public comment in 2 minutes. Okay. All right. Linda Wilson.
That is really interesting. That was my group as well, and I don't envy you that. The University of Chicago report, was it that the mayor would not release it, council wouldn't release it, or the department? And isn't it covered under FOIA? We should be able to get it in some way.
It was the department that couldn't release it, and I don't know what the FOIA.
I don't know the specific FOIA history, but I know that the department's reasoning for not releasing it basically stated, it could be, how do I say this? Basically, could hinder their duties by saying, like, how are we allocating people? Will nefarious actors basically see our strategies? That was kind of the reasoning. I don't know the specific FOIA history.
Part of it is one of the ways to vary an initiative is to study it to death. So we've had 2 studies that have been buried, and now we're going to do it. It seems as though if we get that last one at least partially released, that will open up the next study to be a little bit more accepted. The fact that current systems for data collection are inadequate, may I suggest that might be deliberate? That, gee, we have all this data, but it's useless?
Ema Fulton. And just a reminder to state and spell your name, please, for the record.
Karina, Karina, Fulton, Fulton. I'm just gonna, I wrote down some things and I divided it up. So I just want to emphasize how like the power of the words and how we use them in regards to creating a barrier or breaking the barrier in communication and focusing more on looking at systems and not the individuals who show up and do their job and like put their lives on the line and their families. So that's really important in the way that we communicate. And I wanted to bring up some topics in regards to just ideas of, I'm in healthcare and I'm in science. So I understand, okay, we do a study for 2 years of study, but the need for reaction and changes is immediate. So would it be more effective to have a person that's a civilian that is vetted by the department and vetted by like the older person, and then have that person communicate very closely with the districts, police districts that's within the alderman's or older person's territory, and that's how we, in present time, get information. Another thing is like nursing, okay? There's a shortage of nurses, they're overworked. There's no way that they have enough people for the number of patients that they're expecting. So I feel like that's the same thing we're expecting in sergeants and officers. Sorry, I'm trying to say this too much.
Go ahead.
Okay, so what I'm trying to say is mistakes happen in the hospitals. Nurses burn out, police officers taking their lives. Okay, we need to like be empathetic, look at all those things. And in regards to us going in, telling people how to do their job with regards to, okay, the radio transmission was broadcasted, so then we saw how that impacted like robberies and whatever, right? So just kind of like looking at both sides too, because we're not in there and it's a lot more complex than like what we think. So maybe kind of like creating this bridge to walk together and like figuring out a little bit more direct than like having some outside party study, you know, and then tell us in 2 years who's really gonna look at the study. You know what I'm saying? Just putting it out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Karina. I will speak to the communication aspect. That's something that we get asked about a lot, is to how can residents be made aware of incidents happening more immediately. And that's something that we're talking to Commander Sani, and we want to bring up to CPD leadership, because that is something that we want as well. And unfortunately, we get the information as soon as the Alder's office gets information, and sometimes, you know, it comes out through social media posts. Yeah, and then so we are working towards that. Anybody else have comments?
I just wanted to speak to the point you made at the beginning of is to look at systems and not individuals. And that's something I came through what we talked about today, but just to re-emphasize it, you know, I've got nothing but respect for the officers that are working in the 19th district. That all the other officers are working as hard as they can, given the tools and resources that they're given. What we're hoping to do, and what I've been disappointed by, is that the department as a whole, I think, has been doing a disservice to their officers by not studying this more closely. I want it to be a job that is fun to do, is fulfilling to do, and that it rewards the hard work that they're putting in. And I'm hoping that on a systems level, citywide, we can help make the department as good as it can be. But that takes nothing away from, you know, what the individual officers that are working in our neighborhoods every day are doing, and the sacrifices they're making in doing that. So I want to make sure that's clear.
Yeah, I mean, I would just underscore, you know, at least on the first priority line, which was in the 5th district, which is one of the top 2 or 3 most violent districts in the city. You know, I saw the right day that I had in a lifetime, frankly, and saw how difficult the job that is. And my second schedule for the week, I hope to do with them. And what we're really trying to do is understand the job that police officers have as the civilians that we are. And it's a really hard thing to understand. And I think that, to underscore their point, you know, it does a disservice when people in such a difficult job are allocated based on hunches and like political chess pieces. I don't think that's the best thing for officers. So I think that's part of why we're pushing for this.
And as I mentioned earlier, to just add on this, you know, we want, and to Jenny's points about the right responsibilities, we want our officers to focus and hone in on the jobs that they're meant to be doing: violent, serious crime, these things like dogs off leashes, writing tickets, like all these other superfluous and sometimes unfair jobs that they've been given should be offloaded to other entities. Okay, we're gonna continue. Anna Janina, sorry. I have a difficult name and I should have no excuse.
Anna Pechena, ANNAPECHEU. I'm Russian, but I'm getting to an Italian. But I'm a recent transplant here, so I don't know much about the systems. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. And I wanted to echo a lot of points that people made about data collection and the study. You know, just was curious. These studies, like if they become regular, they can be driven by the questions that we are interested in asking, and these questions can be solicited through community engagement from the police officers themselves, people on the ground, and just, you know, broad questions that are of interest in this area. Perhaps that can drive how and what data we collect. And it might actually then yield better quality data, because then the community understands why we're doing the study, more willing to participate and share their insights as well. So that was just my comment. Question I have two questions. One question is, what are the resources that we have available for these types of studies? Are there enough? Like the financial researchers, you know, staff, that kind of stuff. I heard a little bit about the Chicago work and perhaps funding by foundations, but is there like a regular funding source for this? And then another question not relevant to the study, but something I'm seeing a lot here, a lot more homeless camps are coming back up, closer to like specifically that I've seen. I also know there are migrants getting bused and they are being housed in police stations, or, you know, they're just hanging out on the street sometimes, and it's getting very cold outside, and I'm just really concerned about their well-being, just generally speaking, and also their right for abuse, those populations, because they're so exposed all the time. And also, so what is the committee doing, you know, looking at this issue, or are you looking at this issue?
I do want to start on your first point about including police officers in this study. I think one thing that I want to commend the Community Commission on is including the union and CPD in the search for the next superintendent. I think that was an excellent idea, and I think we should, you know, take those learnings from that process and apply it to this workforce allocation study as well.
In the name of time, I will exchange emails with you, or feel free to email me and I can give you more information about the migrants and the homeless stuff. But one of the reasons why we're supporting the Bring Chicago Home Ordinance, which we'll hear more about as time goes on, is for that exact reason, to make sure that there is a dedicated funding stream to help all people in the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we talk about community engagement, you know, the community includes community members such as ourselves and officers as well. I would say that everything we do as a commission, we try to talk to officers because we feel like we get better data because of it. You know, what would you be if you were trying to improve a system and not talking to people that, you know, go through it every day? That concept is a bit absurd. So, you know, case in point, when we went through the search for the superintendent, I think we interviewed upwards of 200, surveyed upwards of 200 officers. It was about 50-50 civilians, officers, and, you know, when it's going to the head speech union. So it's something that we try to include in everything we do.
John McCarthy.
Yeah, I'd just like to be, excuse me, John, John McCarthy, McCarthy. I'd like to piggyback on what Sam said and what we've been talking about for the last few minutes. And that is, I think the police officers have got to be linked into this. I think it's got to be made clear to them what a benefit this study would be. And in that regard, my question was, have you gotten any response from the FOP? Has anybody approached them about this and said, where are you guys at on this? That would be one question I have. And the other one, and this is connected too, I'm a beat facilitator for Beat 1925. And I think that the beat facilitators in the 19th district should, because I think this would be such a benefit to the cops. I think this is something that the beat facilitators may not be in a position to promote, but they can explain. This is what it is. Right now, it's in Chris Taliaferro's committee. You can put any pressure on him. You know, I mean, just explain what it is and where it's at. Because you guys are dealing right now, it seems, with a political campaign, actually. That's my count. I think I'm sorry, the 19th district is split into, I believe, 15 beats, and each beat has a facilitator who holds beat meetings every other month. You have, it's open to the public, sure. And if you don't know about it, that means that your beat facilitator, which may be me, is not getting the word out to you. But these are going out, and they've been actually going on since 1992. So everyone should know about it by now, but there's a lot of issues I think that they're dealing with right now. The beat facilitators are dealing with. So, okay, so that's it. If you can answer the question about the FOP, I'd appreciate that.
We have not spoken to FOP about it. I think it's a great idea. But we will look into that. And then just about your, like bringing it to the beats. Again, when we write this letter, we're hoping that we can get community members to sign on to show that strength and to show the support behind it. I think it'd be great if beats facilitators help us with that.
And just quickly, I do want to, on the FOP portion, one of the things, the great things is that we have a great Commander Jasani, who's willing to be that liaison between the residents' demands and the union. So we've already had preliminary conversations about specifically the right responsibilities. So we're hopeful that we can gain a lot more traction there from an FOP perspective as well. Alma Cruiser.
Alma, A-L-M-A, Cruiser, K-R-E-U-S-E-R. I understand from the visual, I feel, I agree with what she said. And I'm not surprised that people don't know what a beat facilitator is. I've been trying to always tell the public via social media, like to attend beat meetings. But the ones that I attend, very low turnout. And I think that's something we should push in. The other thing that I find exhausting is that we want to make the police's job easier. This whole thing is all to make it easier. But it all starts at the top. You have the mayor telling the city that the youth committing these crimes are being demonized. There are little demons. They're out there committing crimes. And they're going to grow up to continue doing these crimes with zero consequences. No one's being held accountable, not even the parents. Parents should be, they should be told to the parents. And then those that are over 18 are being let out, and we can thank us for that. Because it's constant. We can, how many times do we have to read in the news that this offender was just released from jail or was let out with a slap on the wrist? Only it's a continuous thing, it's a continuous cycle. Our police's jobs will never get easier if these criminals keep they're let out. And these children are being taught to disrespect our police at school. That has to stop as well. We know that. Because I'm tired of it. I'm tired. I see this police resentment at kids coming out of high school, coming out of grade school. That needs to stop. That starts at home.
I'll just keep it super fast. Responding to you and the previous speaker, so the 2024 CD budget includes raising the number of CAPS, community organizing positions, which is related to the beat facilitator, structure. So it's gonna increase, CPD's community organizing positions by 60%. So they're gonna go from 25, CAPS organizers in CPD to 40. So that's one change that's happening in next year's budget.
Claire Sharkey.
Hi, my name is Claire. I live right here in Raton and Levitt. I'm a substitute teacher in CPS and at Queen of Angels School right over here. And I do a lot of babysitting, so I'm in and out of homes all across the city. So I hear the concerns of all sorts of families. I am in full agreement with what Alma just said. And you spoke, what's her name? Karina. And what Karina said. So first of all, I'd like to thank Captain Forbes, Sergeant Angelo, and Lieutenant Lowe's who are in the back. These are the guys who are out on the streets keeping us safe. Can I just get a show of hands? Who here is tired of the armed robberies, the carjackings that are just continual? Okay, looks like a majority. Okay. Yeah, I am too. I'm tired of it. Sunday alone, there were 20 armed robberies across the city. I turned on the news before I came here tonight, and there were, I believe, 6 yesterday. My question for the council is, I was at the September and October meetings. I wasn't aware that you guys were meeting with Mayor Johnson on November 6th or 7th. When is the next time that you're meeting with him?
There's no meeting currently scheduled. We did just, I discussed with Deputy Mayor Deal that if they're having meetings about public safety in the 19th district, we want to be sure to hear about it. This was really more of an introductory meeting with the mayor, where we were able to get some good comments from him. And also just to address your broader point, I'm sick of these crimes too. It's a big deal that so many of these crimes are happening. But the reason that we are doing this job, that we want the police to do a workforce allocation study, is to make sure that we're using our police department to the best possible degree that we can. We're also really want to make sure that all of our public safety institutions, including the state's attorney's office, including the courts, including the police department, are working together, that we're not blaming one another, and that we're seeing solutions as a community. So we want to make sure that we're strengthening these institutions and doing so together. So that's what we're hoping that we can do here. So thank you.
Example, I spoke to 2 female police officers downtown yesterday, and like Alma just said, I just went up to them to thank them for their service and ask them what they think the current problem is with violent robberies. And one of them gave me an example of an offender who a few years ago was arrested for literally driving a car into a police officer. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He was let out after 3, and that female officer had arrested him again this summer. That's a waste of police resources, and it just keeps happening. The police are arresting the same offenders over and over for the same types of things. So as Sam just said, we have to hold the state's attorney's office accountable and our judges. So we have to be careful with elections. I am going to get involved with the District 19 court advocacy program. So if anyone is interested, you can see me after the meeting. It's something that already existed, but we need to reignite it if we want to keep eyes on what's going on in the courts. And that will kind of support everything that's been said tonight.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, we are a little bit over time, but with the last 2 minutes, I do want to say, please be on the lookout. Actually, first, everyone, if they can get your phone out and take a picture of this QR code. This is a survey that we alluded to earlier. I would love it. Please, 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 because you make my job easier. I have lots of data. If you, 1, complete the survey yourself, but then 2, send this to your neighbors, your friends, anybody within the district, anyone in the city, really, because we want to collect as much information as possible. So please share this. We will have it in our newsletter as well. I will turn that off. So yeah, keep that out. Keep that. I'll turn that function off. And then finally, our next meeting. Please note that it has changed to December 18th. 2023. That is a Monday, not a Tuesday, a Monday at 6:30. It's gonna be at Pilgrim Lutheran Church, 4300 North Winchester. I want to thank again, Social Library for hosting us, and Commissioner Isaac Toboso, thank you so much for being here and joining us, and thank you all for joining us on this very, very cold night. You can always email us with anything else, and with that, we're